Hey, Justin.
Hey, how's it
How
going?
are you? How you doing?
Great.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Rigo just told me that the screening is still going on and it should be over in the next few minutes.
Okay.
And then once it's over, I think he told you all, but we're going to be streaming live on YouTube.
Right.
So once it's over, I think our stream will probably immediately begin.
Okay.
Yeah. And since you're here, I'll just kind of, I was hoping everybody would be here by now, but the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to, thank everyone, all that good stuff. And then I'm going to introduce you all, but I'm not going to read your bios. I'm just going to bring you on and just say your names. And then I'm going to spend the first, there's four of you all. So let's say the first 10 or 12 minutes, just having you all kind of introduce yourself and talk about your sort of key takeaways from the film and how those key takeaways sort of pertain to maybe some of the work that you're doing, to reform policing and criminal justice.
Okay.
And then once we do that, then I'll open it up. I have some other questions. And then the people who are watching on Ovi, they will send questions via Ovi, and then Rico will post them here in the chat. And then I will ask those questions as they come in.
Got it.
All right.
Okay. Sounds good.
Perfect. I'm going to cut you guys. Okay. I think he said he's going to cut us for some reason. Maybe we're talking live on YouTube and we didn't know it. How are you, Felida?
Hello, I'm doing all right.
Am I saying your name correctly?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm Yaki, and I will be moderating tonight. Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
So the screening is still going on right now, and it should be over momentarily. And then once it's over,
Yeah, I just finished.
oh, it did. Okay, so you're there. Okay. So you have more intel than me, obviously. So you already know.
Yeah, I'm literally on about 5 screens at the same time right now.
Yeah, there you go. I'd already watched it, so I didn't get on Ovi tonight to watch it again. And as I was telling Justin, so I'm gonna, welcome everybody in, thank all of our partners, do all that la-di-da, and then I'm gonna introduce you all, but I'm not gonna read your bios. I'm just gonna sort of say who you are and say your name, and then we'll spend the first, say, 10 to 12 minutes of the conversation having each of you introduce yourself, again, talk to us about sort of key takeaways that you took from the film, and then how those takeaways pertain to the work that you're doing in terms of like maybe policing and criminal justice.
We're live, by the way, on Ovi.
We are, and they can see us right now.
Yep.
Okay. I didn't know that. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. Can everyone hear me?
We can, and I was just told that we were live, so I think we're gonna get this thing started.
All right, very good.
All right, so evening, everyone. I didn't realize we were live already, but now I know because as Felida has more intel than me, and that's all right. I love it. But my name is Yaki Smith, and I'd like to welcome you all to the post-screening discussion of both Edwin, directed by myself, and PBS's and Independent Lenses docuseries Philly DA, which is directed by Ted Passon, Yoni Brook, and Nicole Salazar. I am honored tonight to be joined by an esteemed panelist of activists, elected officials, criminal justice reformers, and advocates as we all discuss the themes and issues that these two films explore, and also how those themes pertain to the work that these individuals are doing in this space. Before I introduce the panelists, though, I'd like to thank a few people. We got to do that housekeeping thing. Thank our sponsors, ITVS, Indie Lens Pop-Up, Presser House Gallery, and San Antonio's local PBS station, KLRN, for hosting us tonight. And I'd also like to just personally thank Rigo and Manuel for inviting me not only to screen my film in the series tonight, but also for just inviting me to moderate this discussion. And then lastly, I'd just like to thank all of you. I hope you just enjoyed the film that you watched. I hope that it sparked a lot of questions, that it sort of made you begin to interrogate yourself, and really begin to ask the hard questions about what it is that you can do as we all fight for social justice. And speaking of that, if you have any questions, please put them in the OV chat, and then those will be sent over to me via Zoom, and then I will ask them of our panelists as we move through this evening. And speaking of our panelists, they're all here, and I just kind of want to point them out here. We have with us Statewide Criminal Justice Policy Coordinator, Laquita Garcia. Welcome. We have queer writer, activist, and interdisciplinary artist, Felida Hicks. Welcome. We have Bexar County Justice Project Advocate, Justin Martinez. Welcome. And we also have Bexar County District Attorney, Joe Gonzalez with us. Thanks to each of you for joining us tonight. We are honored to have you. Before we move into any questions, because I have some questions that I want to ask you, but I first want to give you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves, to tell us sort of what key things you took away from the films, and then how those takeaways pertain to the work that you're doing on the ground in terms of police reform and criminal justice reform. And we'll start with you, Felida. You're muted, Felida.
How about now?
We got you loud and clear.
All right, great. Hi, my name is Felida Hicks. I am the author of Hoodwitch. I was also the main person in the film that they showed right after Edwin, 45 Days in a County Jail. And I have been working with several different nonprofits since 2019 to look at local policy. And when I say local, I mean city, county, and region. We are working on different pieces of policy, some of that went to the legislature currently. But as an artist, what I'm doing is I want to translate the very tough legislation language that exists that's normally only read by people who are lawyers or judges or people who are in the system. I want to translate that for regular people, people like me who may not know what their rights are and who may not understand the severity of the things that are being brought up against them and the long-term impact of those things. So currently I am the 2021 Poet in Residence with Civil Rights Corps. Civil Rights Corps was started by a group of attorneys, and I will be helping to translate some of the policies that they're working on and some of the initiatives that they're doing to make it more accessible for other folks, again, like me, who just didn't understand what was going on. So that's the work I do.
Thank you for that. Laquita, we'll move on to you.
Thank you. Hi, and my name is Laquita Garcia. I am currently the statewide Right to Justice Policy Coordinator at Texas Organizing Project, where I have spent the last 8 years. I am directly impacted by the criminal justice system, and like Felida, I'm sorry if I don't say your name correctly, please correct me, because I want to make sure that I'm using the proper names for everyone. I am also looking at local policies in city and counties on issues that end mass incarceration, like cash money bail, cite and release, court-appointed attorneys, and probation reform.
Thank you, Laquita. And I mispronounced your name, but you corrected me without even knowing you did. Justin, we'll move to you.
Thank you. And I'm super excited to be here. So yeah, my name is Justin Martinez, and I work for the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition here in Bexar County as a justice advocate. And the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization committed to the vision where all Texans are able to live in safe, thriving communities where incarceration is rare and every person has the opportunity to succeed. I'm very excited to be participating in this important discussion, and of course, I want to thank Press the House Gallery for the event and the invitation. And I think, for me, after watching the film, one of my biggest takeaways is simply that change is possible, right? That we can do things in a different way. We can pursue these, radical changes, and the sky's not going to fall, right? It just takes a willingness to seek those changes. And so that really influences my work and what I do, because I think anybody who sort of begins to get involved, especially in the criminal legal system, there's a lot of sort of awakening that happens and a lot of reckoning that happens. And to see just how impactful one of the most powerful actors can be, which is the prosecutor in that system, and how it affects people, their families, their communities, I think is what really drives me to keep, to keep the fight going, right? And to pursuing policies at all levels that sort of creates this change, not just incremental, but sort of this massive systemic transformation.
Thank you for that, Justin. And Joe Gonzalez, you are next.
Thank you very much. First, let me thank you all for inviting me to this panel discussion. I'm very excited to be here. I want to thank Pressa House Gallery and everybody else that was involved in this sponsorship of this very important discussion. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised here in San Antonio. I grew up on the west side of San Antonio. I've been a lawyer for over 32 years, but I wasn't born a prosecutor. I started my career as a young prosecutor, but the lion's share of my work has been as a criminal defense attorney. I spent 22 of my 32 years as a criminal defense lawyer. One of the things that I learned early on is that you don't have to, as a prosecutor, throw the book at everybody. There's no reason that everyone should have to have maximum punishment on every case, right? I as a young prosecutor, I worked in probably one of the toughest DA's office in the country in Harris County, and I quickly learned that there's got to be a better way to do it. What I enjoyed about this film, and I saw it last night, I took the time to read it and soak it in last night. I see a lot of similarities between why Larry Krasner and I ran was to affect change, because we knew and we still believe today that we can do better. We're members of the same organization. We're both members of a nationwide reform prosecutors group called Fair Just Prosecution. There's about 30 or 40 of us. I'm one of about 5 in Texas. We continually meet by Zoom. And so a lot of the things that Larry has done in his office, we are doing here. My job is to hopefully educate Bexar County in the reforms that we have already undertaken. In the next couple of days, we're going to roll out our midterm report that will report on all the reforms that we brought into Bexar County, including bail reform and cite and release and the Civil Rights Division and the drug declination and the criminal trespass policy against the homeless. We've done a tremendous job, I believe, in just the 2 years. This is only half of my term, but I look forward to talking to you all more about what we've done. I don't want to take a lot of time right now, but that's a little bit about who I am. So again, thank you for having me.
That's awesome. And we're going to return later on to talk about everything you just talked about. But the one thing that I kind of want to start talking about the film, Philly DA. And the one thing for me that really stood out is the way that Larry Krasner is sort of really subverting the function of the DA's office and starting to deal with the ills from within, right? These sort of systemic wrongs that have existed for years and years. And really less on the criminalization of citizens, which obviously the Philly DA's office has been doing that for years in terms of just criminalizing people, not really looking internally. And there's a great moment where he talks about the redistribution of funds. And that for me sort of speaks to this idea of, as everybody's talking about now, defund the police, right? Which really means taking some of the funds away from policing and instead moving those funds into like education, homelessness, mental health, et cetera, all of these things. And my question for all of you or whoever wants to take this is, why do you think there is such an uproar when we start to talk about rethinking the American sort of justice and criminal system? Why are people so upset whenever we say something like defund the police, or we need to sort of take these funds and put them into something better so that we don't have to have so many people in prison? Why is that?
Laquita, you want to go first?
Sure. What you just asked, like, just really impacted me. And for everybody on the panel to know I'm a crybaby, but I'm directly impacted by the criminal justice system. I spent 11 years in prison. Those of us directly impacted thought, let me go back. The screening of the Philly DA impacted me when he talked about how mass incarceration was a radical movement, and it's going to take a radical movement to end mass incarceration. Because those of us who have found ourselves in the criminal justice system have always been taught to believe that this is just the way things are. You make a mistake, you do something bad, you're punished by incarceration, right? In actuality, I voted for the very first time in 2014. And it took someone coming and knocking on my door and talking to me about the realization of how people coming together can affect change. At first, I didn't even believe it. But the more I got into the work and the more I saw the kind of movement that was building, I knew I had to be a part of that. I actually worked on District Attorney Joe Gonzalez's DA campaign, first DA campaign I'd ever worked on in my life, ever cared to work on. Because for me, he set the stage for a progressive movement that has been a long time coming. And I think right now, the reason people are crying out and demanding change is because they're finding their voice and they're understanding that together we can make a change, because the institutions and the people who created mass incarceration stood together and fought together and continue to fight together to embrace mass incarceration. And it demonstrates to us just how important it is for us to come together and stand together and fight to end mass incarceration, because our numbers outweigh theirs. And we are the ones who are affected and impacted by the change that we need the most. And we're understanding that this isn't just the way things are, and change can happen, and rest assured change is coming. Thank you.
From my perspective, let me tell you that this is not a movement that just happened yesterday. It didn't happen overnight. It's long in coming. I certainly have seen it over the years. And again, practicing for 20 plus years, I certainly had my share of clients that were discriminated, that were subjects of racial inequity. I had more than my share of Hispanic and Black clients who I know were the subject of racial discrimination. There is racial inequity in the criminal justice system. We have to get that out there. We have to admit that there is systemic racism in the criminal justice system, not only in law enforcement, but in prosecution, in the courts, just like there are in business and in the schools and other areas. And the first thing we need to do is recognize it. The second we need to do is work together to do something about it. And I will tell you that I think that it was a boiling pot that just boiled over during George Floyd. I think that was the moment when people said enough is enough. We all need to look at what we're doing. We all need to do better. And so I think that we've come as quickly as we can in a year's time, but we still have to do much, much better. But there are different offices, including mine, that are relooking the way that we do things. One example is the creation of the Civil Rights Division. So we are doing things to try and get better, but absolutely, we've all seen racial inequality in policing, in prosecution, in the court system for years.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with that. We see it and I call it the system. I don't think that justice is an integral part of what we're experiencing right now. I don't think justice is the foundation. Punishment is the foundation, and those two things are different. In 2019, I went with Mano Amiga to Vera Institute's In Our Backyards event, which was held in Philadelphia. And during my time, I had a chance to connect with a number of grassroots organizations from across the country, which was great. That fellowship was amazing. But I wanted to go and take a look at some of the historic places in Philadelphia. Almost every single tour that I went on consisted of primarily white people. And when I stood in line versus, walking into the entrance where the people who were working and supporting the space, when I stood in line, I got a lot of looks and a lot of side comments. And that happened in almost every location that I went to. I think that the problem we're experiencing is that people are afraid to defund the police because they're essentially afraid to up in the system they've become accustomed to. They are still upholding the basis of the US Constitution and the people who created it without acknowledging that those people who created it were biased by nature, that the US Constitution is biased by its very nature and what it stands for and who it protects. And so until we can have that conversation about, hey, this document, which was supposed to protect the people of this land, only protects a certain amount of people in this land, then we're going to continue to see pushback when it comes to reforms. I think that a lot of people are afraid of their safety. They haven't seen an alternative to safety that does not involve police. They think that a lot of the people who end up behind bars mean to go there. They mean to steal. They mean to harm. They mean to experience certain inequities without acknowledging that, hey, maybe if they had housing, they wouldn't feel the need to trespass and sleep here. If they had food, they wouldn't feel the need to steal said food. If they had mental health care, maybe they would have made a different decision when it came to that argument or that, you know, that deal that happened. And so it's really just it's about storytelling. It's about, again, making it easy for folks to understand if we provide our community with the full set of resources that they absolutely need, we won't need police officers. We'll just need community advocates, right? And so it's kind of about changing that narrative, and it's something that has to happen at every level. I think even within inside of the social justice community, there's still lots of things that are happening. A lot of social justice organizations are run by primarily white cis males. And we have to go, okay, we understand you want to do that work. You're an ally. That means you can't be in charge all of the time. And that's a conversation that we're having at every level in our country, I think, right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the challenge, right? I mean, how do we combat a narrative that's grounded in fear, that's grounded in misperceptions? It's not really factual, right? And that's definitely rooted in racist, law and order, tough on crime rhetoric, right? You know, fear, unfortunately, is a very powerful motivator, and it's used consistently in reference to the criminal legal system to other people, right? To put labels that stigmatize and push folks to the fringes of society. And so I think we need to figure out, or maybe some of the things that we can do to sort of combat this is figure out ways in which we can bring more and more people to these issues, right? You know, now most people's understanding of crime, of how our system works, come from what they saw in the evening news or from shows like Law and Order. And that is just not the best source to sort of form your thoughts and ideas around what our legal system is and who enters our system, right? Just like Felida was talking about, we need to have some very hard and very deep conversations regarding these issues with an acknowledgement around the harms caused by a system rooted in racism and equality, right? And I think that also means we have to be okay with being uncomfortable, right? For all of us, but especially for those who work in our legal system, to be in that space, to be uncomfortable. You know, I have the privilege every day of working with people who have been directly impacted by the system. You know, I myself am system impacted. And I think if people just kept an open mind and an open heart and made the effort to get to know what it's really like to be involved in the system, right? And the barriers that people face once they're out, and get to know who these people really are, I think that itself could change a lot of minds and hearts, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
think
great.
everybody has a role to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I believe everybody has a role to play. You know, I see the value in the activist role. I see the value in them protesting and you all protesting, getting to the streets and bringing those issues to light. But the challenge with people like Larry Krasner and myself and the reformers across the country is that we can work with the system from within, right? One of the things that we're doing in our office is trying to change this big ship, trying to turn it around, trying to teach the prosecutor, just like what you're talking about, Felida, that if somebody commits theft, maybe there's a reason they took that pound of steak. Maybe there's a reason that they stole whatever because they have a drug addiction, or maybe they're trying to make ends meet. And so that's why we have improved our pretrial diversion program. It is quadrupled on our felony side. It is almost tripled on our misdemeanor side because we are offering alternatives to incarceration. We're giving the people the opportunity to have a second chance and avoid the conviction.
Yeah, and that, it's interesting because I was gonna sort of dovetail off of something that Felida was talking about, and also Justin, this idea, I think, of really understanding history, right? And understanding that these systems and these structures are rooted in racism, right? And my next question it's interesting, DA, that you said what you said, because my next question actually has to do with the system and this idea of reform, right? So we know that the US has the highest incarceration rate in the world, right? And we also know that modern policing, right, has its roots in slave patrolling. And I'm glad, Felida, that you said it's not a justice system, because you're right, it's an injustice system, right? But when you begin to think about sort of slave patrols, right, this idea of a slave patrol is birthed out of this inherent fear of Black people, and also Black people, that they will rebel, right, and actually take their freedom. And this sort of taking of freedom would then disrupt the American economic system and potentially destroy it, right? So then after we sort of leave slavery and we have these slave patrols, right, we come in, we abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment, but there's a clause in it, right? And this is where my question is. And this clause is very telling, because what it basically says is that one can't be held in involuntary servitude unless they are convicted of a crime, right? Which in some ways, for me, creates this link between slavery and our prison system. Black bodies being used to raise capital, or to literally jumpstart the economic system of the United States, and also prisoners being used again for free labor and things of that nature. And the question is this: do you think that the criminal justice system, injustice system, I love that, as is, do you think it can really be reformed, or do you think that we need to sort of dismantle it in a way, take it apart, and then begin to build something else in its place? Is it too far gone, or are there things that we actually can do from within to fix this?
Well, let me start. I believe that we can reform it. And I think the most logical way to do it is to try and work within the system. First, let me get this out of the way, because I think this is what the biggest challenge for people like myself is we're talking about issues like systemic racism. The large majority of law enforcement do not operate that way. The large majority of prosecutors do not operate that way. It's the minority, it's the group of people that continue to engage in that kind of conduct that we hear about and we should hear about. Those are the kinds of cases that need to be brought to light. But we are all trying to work together for the common good of the country. And so what happens is what we try and do is come together to try and come up with solutions to improve the system. Again, things like alternatives to incarceration, things like reforming the bail bond system, things like offering alternatives to mass incarceration, like maximum punishments, are things that we can do within the system. So it's not something that's going to be resolved overnight. And that's why I think concepts like defunding the police and starting from scratch is a difficult concept, because you really do have to start from the beginning. I think a better approach is to redirect funds to things like community policing, to things like mental health awareness, and other programs, so that law enforcement is better equipped to handle those kinds of issues on the street, instead of starting from scratch, as you mentioned. So I'm a firm believer that you have to, number one, identify those people that are causing the problem, and number two, work within the system.
I'm gonna disagree just on the primary point that you made about stating that there is that most officers are not operating under a racist system, or that I don't think that a lot of people wake up in the morning and intend to be racist. I don't think that's what's happening in our communities. I don't think that's what happens for most police officers. I think what happens is that every part of our daily lives is so ingrained in racism that they just respond the way that they were programmed to respond, right? And so when I look at the way that police is structured, that entire system is very much rooted in a racist beginning. And we see that being translated in the numbers. So it's not an idea that I have. It's not my personal opinion. The numbers say that our system is inherently racist when it comes to policing. And that's something to acknowledge. The other film that I'm in part of, Racially Charged, America's Misdemeanor Problem, is based off of Alexander Natapoff's book that she released several years ago. It has several really incredible people talking about the direct history for misdemeanors in particular, the overcriminalization of sitting in the wrong place, of stepping off the sidewalk into the street, of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that being used as a tool to bring bodies into a building so that they can then receive money from the government in order to make so-and-so rich. And this is something I saw even in Hays County. Our Hays County jail at one point was spending, I think, over $2 million a year to ship people who had not even been charged yet to other counties because we didn't have enough room in our jail because they kept bringing in people for misdemeanor charges. And those people more than often were Black people, even though we make up less than 8% in Hays County. Right? There's a lot of evidence that says that the police officers across the country, whether or not they intend to be racist, are operating under racist ideology, and they're responding to their training. In Austin, the videos for training were very abusive to people who are Latinx or people who are Black, and that's something that everybody recognized once they actually sat down and watched the training videos. There's something that has to happen, I think, structurally inside. I don't think that we can change the system in one day. I do agree that there has to be work that's being done right now in the current system that exists. But I think at the same time, we need to have people working on rewriting that Constitution, rewriting the laws, and thinking outside of the box and going, hey, if our country's founders could do it, why can't we? Why can't we come up with a new idea that works better for all of the people here?
Yeah, I mean, so there's 2 points I want to make. I think it's crucial that we acknowledge that modern day law enforcement sort of, came from, its inception came from these slave patrols, right? Whose job was to criminalize groups that threatened, the dominant white culture. But I think we need to push it a little further and also understand that that includes patriarchal and heteronormative structures, right? That then led to the overcriminalization of Black people, poor people, immigrants, and LGBTQ folks, right? I think that's super important. And I think, when we talk about change within the system, and just to clarify, I feel like there needs to be a complete overhaul and is what's needed within the system. I mean, when you have a systemic issue, like the one we have when it comes to handing out justice, we need systemic transformation. And, it's not going to be easy. We're dealing with a huge bureaucracy that doesn't like to be messed with. But we're at the point where it's not just sort of one aspect of the system that needs to be completely overhauled, right? But it's the entire system. And we've also are at a point where we sort of had years of sort of these reform, very small incremental changes where we're not getting a whole lot back. And we need to really embrace and go all in, like the DA was talking about, like Felida was talking about, of really changing the system from within and embracing alternatives, right? That focus on investing in our vulnerable communities, right? And not just locking people up for extreme amount of times with no real public safety benefit, no fiscal cost benefit, no human cost. There's just nothing that's beneficial for that type of approach, right? And we need to do things differently.
I think when I was sitting here thinking about the question, Yaki, I was thinking to myself, dismantling the system and putting it together block by block, right? I remember not very long ago, the term abolition was presented to me. And as a victim of a violent crime, my immediate reaction was that I got really angry because I am trained to think jail is the answer to everything. And I openly admit that was my thought. And as time went on and I was I began to explore and understand and being open to be taught differently, I really began to realize that, yes, we do need to dismantle this system and put it back together piece by piece. Because I agree wholeheartedly that this system was created by slave patrols. I can remember during my time in incarceration, how we were lifted from our beds early in the morning to be taken out to work in the fields, to pull crops, to be human lawnmowers, to move rocks unnecessarily, to be brought back in dirty from head to toe, which is a representation of what our slaves have endured for many, many, many years and continue to endure. So I think that when we rebuild a system such as this, and Justin, I agree, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it will take time, but it needs to be created to keep our community safe. And to me, that doesn't look like locking everyone up, calling it community safety.
All right. Yeah, you know, and the reason I asked the question is because, you know, for me, I think one of the most dangerous narratives, and this is just me personally, and I hear it being echoed here, is the idea of sort of the bad apple, right? Because I think I do agree there are bad apples, but I also believe that those bad apples fall from a much worse tree, right? Because in some ways, I wouldn't do certain things if I didn't think I could actually get away with them. No, I'm good. Sorry about that. That's my kid. But I wouldn't do some of these things. And I'm thinking of like Derek Chauvin, for example. If you've been watching the trial, a lot of the questioning, I think, is rooted in the idea that, you know, he did something that went completely against what he was supposed to do in policy. But it's like, I'm like, wait, does every cop watch the same bad Kung Fu movie? Because they've done this for years and years and years and years and years. So where do they get this thing from, right? And so I think, to everyone's point, I do think that there's a way in which we have to work within the system, but I do also believe that we only can work within the system while we're building the other, right? Because I think, again, when something is rooted and its foundation is rooted in a racism and oppressive system, it's really difficult to sort of rework something again, that's because you're going to always go back to that root and it's always going to be there. And speaking of that thing, I have a question for you, DA. So one of the hot topics right now in San Antonio, because I've been sort of researching, and I had the opportunity to direct the MLK March in San Antonio and had some people from Fix SAPD in the film that we created. And so one of the big topics right now is the addition of Proposition B onto the May 1st ballot. And just real quick, and you can give us more about Proposition B, but from what I understand is what they're really looking for is being able to take away police officers' collective bargaining power, right? Which would create much more police accountability into everything from like salary to disciplinary action to all of these things. And I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about sort of Prop B, and then what would the effect of, if it actually passed, what would the effect of that be on your office?
Well, it wouldn't have any effect, and I'll tell you that, and if somebody had asked me before, I would have told you that I would have to basically not take a position officially on collective bargaining because it doesn't have anything to do with prosecution. I understood my focus was in criminal justice reform and what we're doing in the office, but I will tell you this, that part of the reason that we established the Civil Rights Division was to bring accountability to the actions of law enforcement. And so that's how we are ensuring accountability. Someone recently said, there's nothing worse for a good cop than to see a bad cop doing something that's going to jeopardize their job. So it's in their best interest for members of law enforcement to bring those kinds of cases, for us to review them and then make the appropriate decision to charge an officer with excessive use of force or with some other crime. And so that's the accountability that the district attorney's office will provide in that kind of a context. So as far as collective bargaining, that doesn't have, unfortunately, anything to do with what we do. And so I can't really comment one way or another on that topic.
Well, to that end, I would love to hear you sort of talk to us just a little bit about the Civil Rights Division, right? And sort of what its function will be.
Okay. Well, let me tell you that one of the ways that we have really taken a good look at what we do in this office is how we review officer-involved shootings. There have been a number of cases that have occurred before I even came into this office that I reviewed on multiple occasions. Officers oftentimes have to make decisions that are split-second decisions that rarely have to do with anything other than whether or not the officer feared for his life. But we have the opportunity and the obligation to review every one of those cases to determine whether the officer committed a crime, whether his conduct rose to the level of causing someone's death such that it was a murder, for example. And that's what the Civil Rights Division does. One of the biggest arguments we heard during the Black Lives Matter movement is how can a district attorney's office like yourselves make a decision about whether or not an officer commits a crime when they're your witness on a drug case, on a robbery case, on just about any other case you can think of. You all have this close relationship. So how can you then make a decision about whether or not you can charge an officer? And you know what? That made a lot of sense. So because of that, I distanced myself from that relationship. I made a decision from here on going forward to never seek the endorsement of a law enforcement union in the future. I made a decision to never take a penny from any law enforcement organization because I wanted to establish that independence. We created the standalone unit that is led by a veteran prosecutor who doesn't deal with any other kind of cases and will not deal with these officers on a day-to-day basis. We leave him to his own decision-making and runs his division, and then he will bring us cases where he believes that he needs to have us discuss whether or not an officer a case should be taken to the grand jury. And by the way, while talking about that there are different things that we've done different from prior administrations. Whenever an officer was being investigated in an officer-involved shooting, prior administrations would issue clearance letters to put that officer back on the street. We don't do that in our administration. We don't participate in any kind of administrative decision to allow that officer to get back on the job. We wait until we get the entire file to review and then decide what to do. Another way we've changed the way we operate is we are taking everything that is a claim of excessive use of force where it results in serious bodily injury or death to a grand jury. We want the citizens of Bexar County to make the ultimate decision about whether or not the officer committed a crime. In addition to that, one of the benefits of having this Civil Rights Division is that we have people in it that will reach out to the victims of someone. If somebody has lost their life, we want to get in touch with the family as soon as possible and keep them apprised of the progress of the case. So that's an example of what we've done that's been different from other administrations because we recognize we have to do better. We have to do better in reviewing these cases. We have to do better reaching out to the victims' families to let them know that we're going to be very careful when we review these cases, and we're gonna err on the side of doing the right thing.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything to say about Prop D? Just curious to know if any of you have thought about that or have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, if I can. So I mean, really, we're talking about police accountability, and I think it's important that we understand that in the U.S. every year there's roughly 1,000 people who die at the hands of law enforcement, disproportionately people of color. And officer-involved shooting and police violence, unfortunately, is a reality here in Bexar County. I mean, according to data from the Texas Justice Initiative, which sort of collects this stuff, Bexar County was the second highest, the second highest of any county in Texas, involving officer-involved shooting from 2016, 2019. For instance, like Damian Lamar Daniels, who was a 30-year-old Black man who was shot by a Bexar County deputy as deputies tried to detain him for a mental health crisis, right? And what makes this even more tragic is the deputy who shot and killed Daniels also shot and killed another person 10 years ago, right? So, I mean, these issues are hard, these issues are difficult, but I mean, we need to do something more than what we're doing now. And that this is a reality, not some far away, distant place, but is really in our backyards.
And just to let you know, that case has not made it to our office. We have not received a case on the Daniels case in order for us to review.
All right, so Felida, I want to sort of come back to you for a second here, because you said something earlier that I thought was great about sort of making sort of the policy more palatable to like just sort of a broad audience. And I know that your work sort of exists at the sort of intersection of like race, gender, sexuality, activism, all of that. And you're really using art as a tool for social change, liberation, and freedom. And I'd love to, there's two questions in that. The first is, can you talk to me a little bit about how you're sort of using your art, right, to sort of make these policies more palatable for the sort of average person? And then the broader and larger question is, what role do you think we as artists have, right, in sort of affecting change in the world?
Yeah, those are both really amazing questions. So the first thing is that I, as a storyteller, I did not realize how important storytelling was to the criminal justice movement, period. Right? We just finished watching a documentary, which requires a filmmaker and someone to determine like what's going to be the best shot, and then someone to edit that. Those people would fall under the category of artist. In order for you to get the cover for this event, some graphic designer had to set that up. The logos that we use when it comes to our offices and our jobs, all of those involve artists, and everything is about communicating a different story or a different option. As a poet, and as a nonfiction writer, I'm working on my memoir currently, and what I'm trying to emphasize is it's everyone. My story is your story. If you get in a car and you have to drive from one part of town to another part of town, so sorry. If you get in a car and you have to drive from one part of town to another part of town, you are likely to be stopped by an officer if you have tinted windows. If you have an older vehicle or you don't have your license plate on the vehicle in the right location, you are going to be pulled over. I was born in LA, and in LA in 1965, I believe, a young Black man was pulled over by the California Highway Patrol. What happened during that stop turned into the Watts riot. Several years later, a Black man was going down the highway. He was stopped by the California Highway Patrol. That turned into Rodney King and the LA riot. Those happened decades apart, but it was the same group stopping people on the road. In particular, I think about Sandra Bland, who was stopped while driving. There are a number of people who are stopped during traffic infractions. My car died on the side of the road, which is how the officer found me. It's important for folks to know that what's happening to you or what's happening to me is something that can happen to you at any given time on any given day for even the smallest infractions, not using a turn signal. We have to have that conversation about the policies that we're saying, the work that the DA is doing. It's meant to affect your everyday life. And when I write poems, I want it to be accessible. When I say cash bail, what do I mean by cash bail? Right? I want to say, I mean, I shouldn't be kept inside of this room for X amount of hours because I can't afford it. And now people who don't know what cash bail is might understand now that you get kept in a room because you can't afford to leave that room, right? Just making it easier to make that connection. I'm hoping that the poems that I'm writing will help to translate specifically legislation around cash bail. I do want to talk about pretrial detention and the services that are not provided for people who have mental health issues. I'm going to try to take the policy, turn it into something that's like a rap or like a or like, you know, some spoken word poem. Right now I'm working on a play in which I record a person who is stopped and it turns into an escalated event in which that person dies. But the mother of that person has a dream of a future in which Sean Bell never died, in a future in which Korean Gaines never died, in a future in which Philando Castile never died, in a future, of course, in which Trayvon Martin never died, and that she's reimagining what community could look like. Her daughter made it home that night instead of dying. What does that mean? How big and important is that Trayvon Martin made it home? And how can we make those tiny changes? And in every single circumstance, even when I do Sean Bell, instead of the officer pulling out a gun in response to sudden movements, the officer offers actual support, right? Oh, do you need help with this? Or, hey, what can I get for you? Instead of immediately assuming danger. So that's that part. The second part of the question, I think that artists will help make it easier for regular folks who don't have the patience or time to read legislation, understand why it's important. Your film, Edwin, helps people to understand that children go to jail for a long time for just about some infractions that they don't have the mental capacity to make different decisions. Some of them don't understand the weight of their decisions. They're children. These are children that are ending up in handcuffs and jail cells and all these types of things. And we need those videos, and we need those photos, and we need those, we need that visual art. We need the representation of sculptures. We need the storytelling in poems and in essays that help people to understand that this is a really big and important thing. I think that materially for the next 20 years, I do think that artists are going to help take us to the next level. If we didn't have that film, we wouldn't know that there are DAs who are doing this work in such a distinguishable way, right? It's good to know Mr. Gonzalez, you just, let us know that there's a whole group of folks who are doing this job. 5 of them live in Texas. I wouldn't know that if we didn't have this film to have that discussion about, right? And
I'm sorry. Thank you. And please call me Joe. Let me just say something real quick, because I think it's important for the viewers to know this. A couple of weeks ago, both Laquita and I traveled to Austin, and we testified against what was called a bail reform bill that was sponsored by a senator from Harris County. Let me tell you, that wasn't a bail reform bill. That was a bail denial bill, because what it did is, if it would pass, it would undo everything we have done here in Bexar County to give someone who is arrested for a low-level nonviolent offense the opportunity to be released. We in the DA's office operate under a presumption of release. If you're there because you're there on a driving while license invalid, or a small amount of drugs, or a shoplifting case, and you don't have a significant history, there's no reason that you should languish in jail just because you can't afford a bond. I bet you most of us right now have $100 we could get out of jail if we get arrested and a bond is set for at $1,000. But most people that are homeless don't have $100. Most people that are homeless don't have $10. Those are the people that are sitting in jail. Those are the people that Laquita and her group have been fighting. Those are the people that we're going to every day recommend PR bonds, because they shouldn't be sitting in jail.
yeah, and the job of the artist is to humanize each and every single one of those people, is to let you know, if you think that this person did it on purpose and they deserve to go to jail for less than $100 in theft, this person is a whole person. They have a family, they have children, they have moms and dads. And it's very possible that you're going to destroy their entire life, make them lose their jobs, make them lose their vehicles, make them lose their belongings for something that is, like you stated, citation eligible.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what Joe had just mentioned, and earlier in our discussion when we had talked about putting the system back together block by block, or working from the inside out. San Antonio is the first place in Texas to ever incorporate what is called a wire bail process. Part of what safety looks like to us is our community members in Texas, all across Texas, and our partners at the Bail Project have put together a community bail fund in which we have been able to set free over 350 people. And we continue to work with these people after bail. working on what are some of the mental health resources you need? What do you need to conquer your addiction? What are some of the resources you need to pay rent, take care of your children, get to court, take care of all of the things that you need to take care of, in our hopes that we are building a safer community for our neighbors. And the thing that really hit home for me with this SB 21 bill and going to the legislation to fight is how dare our government tell our communities what we can do with our money. If we choose to come together and put our money into a bail fund to bail those out who would be sitting in jail pre-trial without being convicted of a crime, bring them home to their families, continue to build a safe community within our community so that we no longer need police, how dare you as the government tell us that we can't do that? And Texas Organizing Project, the Bell Project, and other local, organizations in Texas are going to continue to fight back on legislation such as that.
Yeah, and if I can just quickly, I mean, it was incredible to watch that hearing and see the DA there testifying against that. I mean, I know, DA, you said you're one of 5, but I think you were the only other DA there that was testifying against that, right? And I think for me as like an advocate, it just makes it so exciting to be working in Bexar County, because we have such, forward-thinking people that are willing to like do what they need to do, to drive up to Austin. I've been in testifying those hearings. Sometimes, the weight and just the logistics of it can be daunting. And to have our DA there testifying against that bill, Laquita, who gave powerful testimony on that bill. And of course, the people that have been directly impacted by this to show just how dangerous, this is and how this is going in the wrong direction, not in the direction we need to be going.
And if I could give credit where credit is due, I was there because our county judge and our county commissioners asked me to go there. They knew about it. We're all like-minded progressives. And the sheriff is as well. Laquita works with the sheriff all the time. He believes that people that are there on low-level nonviolent offenses don't need to be languishing in jail. If I can borrow a phrase he uses all the time, jails are for people that we're afraid of. And because of that, I like to say we have a good trifecta of local leaders that think the same way. And so because of that, we work together.
Yeah, and it's y'all kind of stole my question because I was doing some research on that and I was going to ask you where that was, because I saw an article, I think in 2019, Laquita, where you were actually talking about this bill reform and talking about working with the DA and the sheriff. But it sounds like it's still sort of being pushed forward, but there has really been no decision made just yet. So we're hoping that something happens because we need that. I want to kind of dovetail off of something that Felida was talking about. And Justin, this is a question for you because I know you work with a lot of young people. My film obviously, deals with a young man again. He did indeed commit this crime. He murdered a cab driver and was sentenced to 40 years and gets out at age 29. And my question is, I would love to hear you talk about how these harsh punishments for kids not only affect them, right, but affect the community, affect their families, and how in many ways it just sort of disrupts so much that we're trying to sort of build when it comes to this notion of social justice and really restorative justice.
Yeah, I'd love to address that. I mean, so Edwin's story is incredibly special to us because the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition is and has worked with the Epicenter and Lone Star Justice Alliance to bring Texas in line with the rest of the country when it comes to these types of extreme sentences, for those that were a child when they committed them. Currently in Texas, if you're under the age of 18 when you commit certain offenses, you are forced in many cases to serve 40 years of your sentence, 40 years of your sentence before you can have your first parole hearing. And we all know how parole works in Texas. You're almost never guaranteed to get that first release, right? And we are working to change this, right? That second look that we sort of heard about in that documentary, what that legislation looks to do is to essentially half this, right? So the person would only have to wait 20 years, and that the board and pardons and paroles would need to take in mitigating factors into their consideration. Because honestly, right now, they call it 2D, right? It's the offense that keeps you from getting paroled. And what can you do? The offense has already happened. I can't change that, you know? So, I mean, you know, we know that kids' brains are different from adults, right? I mean, we know people age out of crime, you know, we know that if enacted, Texas would save all kinds of valuable resources, but more importantly, sort of save from the devastating human costs associated with this current practice. And that's exactly what I need. I mean, imagine you're 12, 13, 14, thrown in the adult system. You're literally raised, socialized, educated in an adult prison system. I mean, it's really hard to think that, right? I mean, to think that in Texas, here's a 12, 13, 14-year-old who committed this crime, that there's a whole story there that no one hears. I mean, there's nuance there, there's trauma there, there's all kinds of things that are there. And to tell this kid that you are irredeemable, that you are so worst of the worst, that you are now to live and essentially die in a cage. I mean, it's just unfathomable, right? And these things need to change. They need to change for, I mean, a whole host of reasons. And I do just want to say that the second look bill was voted out of committee unanimously by both Republicans and Democrats, and it was just recently voted out of the House. So, you know, we definitely have some steps to take, but I mean, we are very hopeful that in 2021, you know, we can finally sort of begin to unravel and fix this just incredible unjust practice when it comes to how we treat children.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have two last questions as we wrap up. My first question is, how do we sort of bridge this gap between police and community, right? Because we know that that's sort of one of the big issues that we have is a lot of people who are policing communities, they don't know anything about the communities, and they're afraid of the people that they are policing, and which in some ways dictates the way that they deal with those individuals. How do we sort of begin to fix that? How, you know, what can we do from within to say, all right, this is the way in which we should be doing policing, so that again, we can make sure that policing is doing what it needs to do and not just criminalizing people? And anybody can take that.
Well, let me begin. I think part of it is better training of our officers at the academy, better training at recognizing what is called implicit bias. We all have it to some degree or form. And so making officers, making prosecutors, making judges aware of implicit bias is a good first step. It's a good start. And I do think that it's important to have law enforcement engage with the community. I'm a big proponent of community policing. When I grew up on the west side of San Antonio, I knew the officers that patrolled our district. Believe it or not, he would pull over and toss the football around when we were playing in the street. I remember that as a kid. I think if we can bring some of that back, I think if law enforcement can be more engaged, I think our youth would be less afraid of them if there was more interaction. But it's something that's not going to happen overnight. But I think the first step is an awareness that there is a problem, and then an effort for all of us to come together, to work together, to make it better.
I agree. I think training is necessary, better training. But when I think of training, I definitely think of putting community first. The police are supposed to be public servants. And instead of feeling like they are here to serve the public, very often it's, no, you're going to listen to me no matter what I do or say. And the dynamic is different. I'm not sure what is included in the training here in Texas for a lot of police officers, but I doubt that there is active training in understanding the community economy when it comes to how, what people are able to afford in that area. Any training on mental health issues and the things that contribute to those mental health issues. I know that you can become a police officer a lot faster than you can become a firefighter or anyone else in Texas, which is kind of incredible. I think that before you get a gun and a badge, you should have way more time spent on understanding who the people are in the community and what normally leads to the situations that they're going to run into, right? When you see someone who is stealing something, you need to know that there's probably all these other factors that are contributing to that to kind of help them. I like that you said that so that children won't be afraid of police officers. I think police officers need to learn how to not be afraid of the people in their community. I think they need to understand that these are the people that they're supposed to serve and protect, and not just one kind of community, but all of the communities deserve the same respect and deserve the same compassion that they give to their own family members, because they have a really big job to do. I really hope that in the future we will see a de-emphasis on giving police officers and police stations guns, tanks. We have a tank here in Hays County. No need for a tank here in Hays County. Large shields and all these other things that are more appropriate for military than for community advocacy. I would really like to see that.
Yeah, and I mean, so I guess just to piggyback off of that, I think sort of the demilitarization of our police force is incredibly important. And I think, again, sort of along those lines of, having hard conversations and being in uncomfortable places, I think we need to take a step further and sort of rethink the role of police, right? I mean, I don't think someone with a gun should be approaching someone with a mental health crisis. I think it's important that we have training. We need that. I think it's important that officers have an understanding of the neighborhoods and the people that they're surrounding with. But I think we also need to understand that wouldn't it be great if maybe people who are having these types of sort of quality of life issues were able to see a social worker, right? Or, a therapist or whatever, and able to sort of, find ways in the community, infrastructure that we just don't quite have yet where they can get help, So, I mean, yes, to everything that's been said, and I think just to push us a little further, again, sort of rethinking, how do we want police to sort of interact in our communities? How do we want, what's their role? And also maybe what are some things that maybe they shouldn't be doing, if, all the time, right?
I'd like to add what Justin and Felida just said about, yes, training is super important in many different aspects. We often hear about training being reflective of policing. And Joe, you just said something that hit home with me about police officers engaging with the community. So while we're creating policies that enforce training on policing, maybe we should also consider creating policies that require officers to actually engage with their community. We should be hiring more police officers that look like us. We should be hiring more police officers who actually live in our communities and know what it's like to be in our communities. So that with the hope that the fear that community has of police and police have of our communities, we can figure out a way to bridge that gap, and it'd be less about policing and locking folks up and more focus on community safety as a community, including police.
That's awesome. One thing that always speaks to me when I think of police reform, there's a book called Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. And she really, really speaks about police reform, police abolition. And there's just one passage that I want to read. And she says, rather than try to imagine one single alternative to the existing system of incarceration, we might envision an array of alternatives that will require radical transformations of many aspects of our society. Alternatives that fail to address racism, male dominance, homophobia, class bias, and other structures of domination will not, in the final analysis, lead to decarceration and will not advance the goal of abolition. And what I'm hearing tonight from all of you is that this is a multi-pronged issue, and it's going to take a multi-pronged approach, that there is not one thing that we can pluck up and all of a sudden it's going to fix this. And to that end, I want to thank each of you, Laquita, Felida, Justin, Joe. The work that you are doing is so important. We need you out there in the streets. Joe, we need you in the DA's office. Laquita, we need you doing what you're doing. We need you all really advocating, because oftentimes, the average person doesn't even know how to advocate for themselves. And they need that education, and they need someone who knows how to advocate for them, who understands policy and who understands really how to fight the system from within to fight for them. And then obviously educate them on the ways in which they can fight for themselves. And so I just want to end this by thanking each of you for what you're doing. We are all supporting you. I know I am supporting you. Anything that I can ever do to support the work that you're doing, please let me know, and keep doing what you're doing. Again, thank you everybody for watching tonight. Thank you Pressa House Gallery. Thank you ITBS. And just thank everyone who helped to put this event together. This was an awesome conversation. And again, thank you all so much.
It was great to meet you all and to have a chance to chat.
Yes.
Thank you.
This was
Good
great.
night to
Thank you.
everyone.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye.